Assalamualaikum and good day. In this video, we will look at the second part of chapter 1. So, in the second part of chapter 1, we have three main contents. The first one is the definition of sampling, and then the second one is the type of sampling, techniques, and the last one is the data collection methods. Okay, what is sampling? Sampling is the process of selecting a sample from a population. So if you have a very large population, you must just get a sample. So to get that sample, you must conduct sampling process. So it is more preferable than census because save time, cost and manpower. Because for census, we must conduct the research for the whole population. The information obtained from the sample is used to make a conclusion about the population, and sample must be selected in such a way that it will accurately represent its population. Okay, in order to do so, appropriate sampling techniques must be used. Okay, in the sampling process, the first one is to define the target population. So from your research objective, you should define your target population. Second step is to determine the sampling frame. So what is the sampling frame? Sampling frame is the list of all individuals or items from which the sample can be obtained. For example, if my study is about the smoking habit among your ITM students, so my sampling frame should be the list of all students in the ITM. Okay, next step is to select a sampling technique. Sampling technique is a scientific method of selecting representative samples from the population. So we will look at the sampling technique later after this. Okay, next step is to determine your sample size, and the last step in sampling process is of course to execute the sampling process. Alright, so moving on to the sampling techniques. In order for us to select the sample, we must use very appropriate sampling techniques. So sampling techniques can be divided into two. The first one is the probability sampling, and the second one is the non-probability sampling. Okay, for probability sampling, we will select the sample in which every element in the population has a known probability of being included. Normally for probability sampling, it is preferable to use this kind of sampling when the sampling frame is available. But for non-probability sampling, we just take the sample without probability feature, and normally we will use the non-probability sampling when our sampling frame is not available. There are 5 techniques in probability sampling. The first one is simple random, and then we have stratified sampling. Next, we have systematic sampling, as well as cluster sampling, and the last one is the multistage sampling. As for non-probability sampling, there are convenience sampling, judgmental sampling, snowball sampling, and quota sampling. Okay, the first method in probability sampling is the simple random sampling as technique. So in simple random sampling, every item has equal chance of being selected. Okay, in order for us to conduct this technique, we must number every item in the population. It is used when the items are homogeneous. Homogeneous here means the item possesses the same characteristics. And of course, because this one is the probability sampling technique, so in order for us to use this technique, our sampling frame should be available. So in simple random sampling, when our population is small, small here means when the number of n is less than 300, the population size is less than 300. So in order for us to randomly select the sample, we should use the lottery method. Lottery method is like lucky draw, cabutan bertuah. So we just pick, let's say we want to pick 10 samples from 200. So we just randomly pick the 10 samples. Okay. But for a large population means when the sampling, when the population size is more than or equals to 300. Okay. So for large population, we might use random number table or random number generator to pick our random sample. Right? Actually, you can Google this random number generator. There are a lot of tools. There are a lot of websites that provide us with the random number generator. Instead of using a random number generator that already exists in the Google, you can also use random number generator in Excel. Okay, in using simple random sampling, there are a few advantages. Number one, it is easily applied because we just pick a random sample. Kita hanya ambil sampel-sampel tersebut secara rawak. Number two, it is free from systematic selection bias because this simple random sampling is not a systematic way. So we just pick our sample randomly, and of course, in SRS, all elements have equal chance to be selected. Okay, but the disadvantages of this method, the first one is it is difficult to obtain sampling frame. Okay, and it is tedious for a very large population. When your population is very large, it is very expensive and difficult to get the data, to get the information. And lastly, no assurance of representativeness because sometimes when we pick the sample that we pick does not represent the whole population. Okay, next, we have systematic sampling. Systematic sampling is a random sampling. It is also a random sampling, but with a system, okay, in a more systematic way. It is also used when the population is homogeneous and when the sampling frame is available. So in systematic sampling, the sample is obtained by randomly selecting one element from the first k elements. Okay, k here is the interval, and then we pick every kth element thereafter. Okay, to get this k value, the formula is capital letter N over small letter n. This is the population size. This small letter n here means the sample size. In systematic sampling, only the first element is selected at random. Okay, let's say the first element is R. Okay, remember only the first element is selected at random. For the next element, the element that must be selected is the element of R plus K. Okay, R plus with our interval K. And then the next one is R plus with 2K. And the next one is the element of R plus 3K, and so on until sample size of N is obtained. Okay, let's see this example. Okay, let's say I have 12 elements in the population. So my population size is 12. And for the research purpose, I only need 4 samples. So this is my small letter n. Okay, now I want to use systematic sampling to get the 4 samples. Okay, so in order for me to do the systematic sampling, I must identify the k value first. K is population size over sample size. So 12 over 4 is 3. Okay, so my interval is 3. So for the first element, I must randomly select from the first 3 elements of the population because my k is 3. So the first 3 elements are these 3 here. Okay, so I can just randomly select one element as my first sample. Okay, maybe I can pick number 1, or maybe I can pick number 2, or maybe I can pick number 3. Okay, so for now I pick this number 2 as my first element, my first sample. For my second sample, because my k is 3, so my second sample should be the element of the number 2 plus 3. 2 here because my first sample is the number 2, 3 here because because my interval is 3. So 2 plus 3 is 5. So person with the number 5 will be my second sample. Alright. As for the third sample, because previously my sample is number 5 and the k is 3, so 5 plus 3, 8. So number 8 is my third sample. And my last sample, sample number 4, the third sample is number 8 and the interval k is 3. So number 11 will be my sample, my last sample. So these 4 are my samples by using systematic sampling, provided that the first sample is the number 2. Okay. Alright. So this is how you conduct the systematic sampling to get the sample from the population. Okay, in systematic sampling, the advantage is it is easier to implement than SRS. Okay, because we just need to pick randomly for the first sample only. As for the next sample, we just follow the K value, right? But the disadvantages of this method, number one, the problem can arise if there is regularity within the list. But sometimes when certain pattern exists in the sampling frame. And second disadvantage is it does not fully meet the criterion of randomness, since some of the samples of the given size have zero probability. Like my example before, because my first sample is the number 2, so that means number 3 and number 4 have zero probability of being chosen. So this is the disadvantage of systematic sampling. Okay. Alright, next one, we have stratified sampling. So this sampling is used when the population is not homogeneous. Not homogeneous means heterogeneous. Heterogeneous means when the element in the population possess the different characteristic. And of course, because this one is the sampling under probability sampling, so it is normally used when the sampling frame is available. Okay, in stratified sampling, first step is we must divide the heterogeneous population into several homogeneous strata. Strata here is the same meaning as group. Maksudnya kita perlu bahagikan population yang heterogeneous tadi kepada beberapa group yang homogeneous. Alright? And then samples are taken from each homogeneous strata using sample random or systematic method. Contoh saya ada satu population, heterogeneous population, maksudnya population with different characteristics. So in stratified sampling, I will divide these heterogeneous population into few strata. Okay, so the first strata, the first group may be group of this characteristic. Second group karakteristik yang seperti ini. Next group karakteristik yang seperti ini. Okay, so daripada heterogeneous population kita akan divide into homogeneous group. From the homogeneous group kita akan take sample. Alright. So to take sample from each strata, we are going to use simple random or systematic method. Okay. Alright, in stratified sampling, we must use proportional stratified sampling. So in order for us to identify the sample size needed for each strata, for each group, we are going to use this formula. This capital letter Ni here means the population size for each strata, for each group. This N here is the population size. And this small letter n is the sample size. Okay, let's say a total 100 students of a school are grouped according to their race. The sample size needed is 60. So this is our population size, 200, and we only need 60 sample size. So these students already grouped in 4 groups, A, B, C, and D. Actually, this is our strata. Strata A, strata B, strata C, strata D. So for group A, we have 20 students. Group B, 60 students. C, 80 students. D, 40 students. Because now our population, sample size is only 60, we must determine how many samples we want to take from A, from B, from C, from D. So just use this formula here, and I equals to capital letter Ni over capital letter N multiplied with small letter n. So for group A, 20 over 200. So this capital letter N refers to the population size. Multiply with small letter n here. Small letter n is the sample size, 60. So we will get only 6 here. That means for group A, we only take 6 samples from 20. Okay, and for group B, 60 over 200 times 60. So only 18 samples from group B, and from group C, 80 over 200 times with 60, 24. So only 24 samples from group C, and the last one for group D, 40 over 200 times with 60, 12. Only 12 samples from group D. So altogether, we already achieved these 60 samples. So this is how you conduct the proportional stratified sampling. Okay. So for this stratified sampling, the advantages are the sample will be more representative of the population because we take the sample from each of the strata, from each of the group. Okay. The second advantage is all the groups will be selected with equal portion, and items from each group have equal chance to be selected. For the disadvantages, number one, this technique is difficult to select. The advantages of stratified sampling are, number one, the sample will be more representative of the population because we take sample from each of the group. Okay. Number two, all the groups will be selected with equal portion, and items from each group have equal chance to be selected. The weaknesses of stratified sampling are, number one, it is difficult to select relevant stratification variables, especially when we are dealing with a large population. And number two, it is not feasible to stratify on many variables. And weakness number three, sometimes to conduct this technique, this sampling technique, it requires us a lot of money. Okay, next, we have cluster sampling. So this cluster sampling is used when the population of interest is scattered widely due to geographical area. And of course, because this is under probability sampling, we are going to use this method when the sampling frame is available. In cluster sampling, the population is divided into several clusters. So these several clusters is known as subpopulation. Each of the clusters will represent the population. Next step, a random sample of cluster is selected. Okay, maksudnya tadi kita ada population, and then from this population we will divide this into several clusters. Okay, let's say C1, C2, C3, C4, C5. Okay, next step, we will randomly select few cluster. Okay, let's say we just randomly select this C1 and C3. Okay, next step, for each selected cluster, all items are selected as sample. That means from this C1 and C3, all elements are selected as our sample. Okay, for example, a researcher wants to determine annual household income in a city. Each block within the city is treated as cluster. Randomly select a sample of clusters and question every household within the cluster. So, maksudnya, let's say kita ada this population. In this population, we have 4 clusters, 4 group. Now we are using cluster sampling. So, in cluster sampling, we just pick randomly few cluster. Let's say I want to pick cluster 1 and cluster 4 as my sample. So all elements inside cluster 1 and cluster 4 will be my sample of the study. Okay, bermaksud untuk cluster 2 and cluster 3 kita tak akan pilih apa-apa item dari these two clusters as our sample. Okay. As for the advantages of this cluster sampling, number 1, it is easy to implement because we just pick few cluster. Number 2, reduce cost, time and workforce. Sebab kita hanya ambil beberapa cluster daripada cluster yang banyak-banyak tadi kan. Sebab itulah kita akan dapat jimat cost, masa dan juga workforce. Okay, but the disadvantages of this cluster sampling are, number 1, it is imprecise since the sample might not be representative of the population. Sebab kita hanya pilih beberapa cluster sahaja, bukan semua cluster as our sample. Number 2, it is difficult to compute and interpret the results if we divide into small number of large clusters. So for cluster sampling, it is preferable if you divide into large number of small cluster. Okay. Jadi maksudnya untuk cluster sampling ni lebih bagus kalau kita bahagikan population itu kepada banyak cluster dan dalam cluster tersebut ada sedikit elemen. Okay, next we have multistage sampling. So this is the last technique in probability sampling. Okay, this technique is an extension of cluster sampling. Okay, the multistage sampling is designed to reduce time and cost when working with samples from very large populations. Okay, it is used when the initial clusters seem too complex to handle. So they are broken down further into smaller clusters to a size which is more manageable. For example, we need a random sample of 2,000 residents. So our sample from Malaysia population. Alright. So in Malaysia population, we have 14 states. Okay. So the first stage in multi-stage sampling is to select maybe 4 states at random. So from the 14 states, we just pick only 4 states. Alright. Okay, next, from the 4 selected states, we are going to choose only 5 districts. Okay, from the 4 states. Okay. We just need 5 districts from each state. Okay, maksudnya daripada state yang pertama tadi kita ambil 5 district, state yang kedua pun ambil 5 district, state yang ketiga pun ambil 5 distrik, state yang keempat pun ambil 5 distrik. Alright, and finally, we need to select 100 individuals at random from each of the selected districts. That means now, in total, we have 20 districts. Okay, so 20 districts times with 100 individuals. So, total, we will have 2,000 samples. So, this is the illustration of multi-stage sampling. Okay, one of the advantage in multi-stage sampling is we can reduce cost, time, and workforce. Okay, but the disadvantage is no assurance of representativeness, especially when we are dealing with a very large population. Alright, so that's all for probability sampling. Okay, so for summary, in probability sampling, we have 5 different techniques. Number 1 is simple random sampling. Number 2 is systematic sampling. Number 3 is stratified sampling. Number 4 is cluster sampling. And the last one is the multi-stage sampling. Right? Okay, let's try these exercises. Number 1. Okay, the question asks you to state the type of sampling technique for each of the following. Number 1, a researcher is interested in studying the career aspirations of students from the Faculty of Business, which consists of 30 classes. The researcher intends to choose all students from 5 classes for the study. So in Faculty of Business, we have 30 classes. We only choose 5 classes for the study. So for this one, this is the example. This is the example of cluster sampling. Okay. Question: a lecturer is interested in conducting a study to investigate the relationship between level of stress and CGPA among diploma students from Faculty of Computer and Mathematical Sciences. The questionnaires were distributed to 280 randomly selected students, and the total population for each program in the faculty are recorded as follows. So the sample is only 280 students. So for this faculty, we have we have 4 programs. 1, 2, 3, 4. From these 4 programs, we only need 280 samples, 280 respondents. So that means for each of the program, we will take few sample. So for this one, this is a stratified sampling. Okay, not cluster sampling. Okay, sebab untuk soalan nombor 2 ni, setiap group kita akan pilih beberapa sampel. Okay, tapi kalau cluster dalam beberapa group, dalam beberapa cluster, kita hanya pick few clusters as our sample. Alright? I hope you can see the difference between cluster sampling and stratified sampling. Okay. Next. Number 3, a survey on the workers' satisfaction level was carried out at company X. The company has 24 branches with the same setting. A sample of 6 branches was selected at random. So from 24 branches, we only pick 6 branches. Okay. All workers, all elements of these 6 branches were selected as our sample. Okay, so daripada 24 group tadi, kita hanya ambil 6 group sahaja. Dan setiap elemen dalam 6 group tersebut diambil sebagai sampel. So this is a cluster sample. Alright. Last question. A nationwide travel agency, Travel, offers special rates on trips to China to Malaysian citizens. A researcher of Travel wants to do a research on the ages of those people taking the trips. 80 customers taking the trips to China in the last 12 months were selected as sample. Alright, so now these 80 samples are randomly selected, okay, from the list of all customers taking the trip to China. So for question number 4, this is a simple random sampling. Because we just randomly pick a few samples from the list. Okay, we have the list of the people taking the trips to China, and then from that list, we just randomly pick 80 samples. Alright, that's all for this video. In the next video, I will explain about non-probability sampling. Okay, thank you for watching.